So good evening, everyone. You're all doing well. It's nice to see you. I hope you're enjoying the little change in weather today. We talked about that earlier. I know I am. We're going to continue on tonight with our discussion of the stages of the outer dissolution related to the Bardo of the end of life. So we started to look at that last time we met. We discussed this series of processes that happens when life comes to an end. And so from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhism, we say that many things have to come together in terms of physical elements, as well as propensities and karma. They all have to come together for life to begin. And then consequently, at the end of life, these start to undo themselves as a result of karma. And then the elements fold into one another. So the last time we met, we talked about first two of these stages of outer dissolution, and there are 5. We'll do the rest of the outer dissolution tonight. But before we get into that, as we typically do, we want to take a moment to just relax and become a receptive vessel for the teachings. So we try to just open our minds up, let go of whatever is going on in there, and make the commitment, the Samaya commitment of the Bodhisattva, that we resolve to practice the Dharma and receive precious Dharma teachings, not only for our own benefit, but for the benefit of others. Of course, in order to really be of benefit to others, we must ourselves gain liberation so we can lead. So the goal is ultimately for all sentient beings to become enlightened. We try to empty samsara, but until samsara is empty, we have to work on ourselves to obtain liberation first, and then hold our hands out to the other sentient beings and bring them with us. So with that in mind, we again make this commitment to listen to the teachings, try to really hear the teachings, try to remember the teachings throughout the week, and think about them, do hearing, contemplation. And the contemplation is that we familiarize ourselves with them and work out any doubts that we might have about them. And as we become confident in them, we try to adopt them and put them into practice in our lives so that everyone benefits. So with that in mind, we can go on with the discussion of the stages of physical dissolution, the outer dissolution of the gross physical body. So as I said, karmic propensities then at the end of life start to create the causes and conditions for the elements to come apart. So they start to undo themselves. Last time we discussed first 2 of the outer dissolutions, these being earth dissolving into water and water dissolving into fire. And tonight we will begin with the 3rd stage, which is fire dissolving into wind. So in terms of, and again, as we talked about last week, where there are the outer signs of these things happening at the end of life, the inner signs, and then if the person happened to be a practitioner of the Dharma, especially a tantric practitioner, they might have some secret signs. So we'll go through all 3 of those. So in terms of fire dissolving into wind, the outer signs of this occurring is that the physical body becomes warm. The person may start to feel kind of feverish. and then the body becomes chilled. So they kind of develop this alternating state of warmth and cold. Their breath to other people also seems kind of cold rather than normal warmish breath that people have. And at this point, the person will likely stop eating and drinking as they cannot digest or metabolize anything, either food or water or liquids. The environment also to them seems hot and then cold. Again, this alternating sensation of heat and cold. The sense of smell starts to wane. And some say, with regards to the sensation in the body, if the heat dissipates from the top down, it is a sign that their next rebirth will be in the lower realms. But if it dissipates from the legs to the torso and all the way up to the head, the rebirth for that person will be in the higher realms. So a more auspicious sign. In terms of the inner signs, which again are more likely the things that the person is going to experience themselves, they're going to be less apparent to somebody observing. The outer signs can be observed by others, and then the inner signs are more observable to the person or somebody who's been attending them, through this process for a while. Here, the mind becomes clear and then lapses into a lack of clarity. So at this point, this stage is related to the skanda, or the aggregate of perception. And so when perception dissolves, one loses the ability to be able to define information that we get from the other sense orifices, like the eyes or the ears or the nose. So there may be no recognition of familiar things. So this person at this point may not recognize family members, may not recognize people that were close to them. They might not be able to remember names or the designation of things. This is also related to discriminating wisdom declining. So the person is unable to distinguish things around them. That starts to become very difficult. And that some say also that the person might say that things seem to appear red to them. And then the secret signs for fire dissolving into wind. There is a smoky appearance in the last dissolution, and it becomes more intense. So when earth dissolved into fire, there was a smoky sensation, and now that smoky sensation becomes more intense, and they might also see sparks or fireflies, and this indicates fire succumbing to wind. The next stage of dissolution is wind dissolving into consciousness. The outer signs of wind dissolving into consciousness are that their breathing may become more difficult, becomes rough and short. Person may have a very raspy voice that is also where the inhalation might be short and the exhalation very long and labored. And sometimes they call this in the West the death rattle. The eyes will roll up, and then there is a loss of sense of taste and smell. The inner signs of this occurring is that the person experiences a sensation of being blown around or floating, as though there was a wind lifting them and moving them. Almost as though a wind was sweeping away everything. And of course, along with this, there might be likely this sense of bewilderment and confusion. There is a loss of sense of the outside world, and the person experiences illusions or hallucinations. And these are really just thoughts that are intensifying because their world becomes more internal. The external world and the world of the aggregates and sensations is in decline and coming to end. So they're going more internal. If the person has led a good life, then these illusions might be pleasant. They may have visions of deities, angels, teachers, beneficial things. And if they have led a non-virtuous life or a bad life, the illusions will be unpleasant. This dissolution relates to the dissolution of the skandha of formation. So the person loses all sense of purpose and motivation. And it is also related to all accomplishing wisdom. So the person is now unable to perform any actions. And some say that at this point, things may appear more greenish to the person. And in terms of the secret signs, some kind of light appears. So either like a lamp, in Tibet they say a butter lamp because that's what they typically burn, but it can be a lamp or some kind of torch that appears to the person. And then lastly, the last stage of outer dissolution is that consciousness dissolves into space. So at this point, all of the dissolutions have occurred at the level of the material part of the body, the gross physical body. And when we get to the dissolution of consciousness dissolving into space, it really moves completely internally. It's at the level of the subtle body. And at this point, the physical body dies and the breath ceases. So the outer signs of this occurring are the body becomes motionless, there is gasping for air, and respiration ceases with one final exhalation. The inner signs are there is a continuity of sensation from the last dissolution, where wind dissolved into consciousness. And that is that there is still conscious bewilderment and confusion, and also this sensation of floating in the air persists. And they still continue to hallucinate and have illusions as the inner dissolution of consciousness hasn't taken place yet. That's part of the inner dissolution. So at this point, the gross consciousness does cease to exist, but the inner subtle consciousness is still there. So there is still this experience that the person has of things existing. And then the secret signs, there is still that appearance of the butter lamp or torch. So as I said, at the completion of this, the gross physical body has died, but there is still the subtle consciousness left. And during the inner dissolution, the inner respiration will also cease. So the outer respiration, the actual breath ceases, but there is still an inner respiration. We can see from this progression that what is happening is the person's existence becomes increasingly non-dual, and that the sensations that the person has and the sense organs stop becoming separate things. They start to become one thing. You can also see that the senses dissolve from the top down, first from the eyes, then in order moves to the ears, the nose, the tongue, and finally the touch sensation. So this shows going from the most dualistic sensation and sense organs to the most non-dualistic, because we can see from a great distance. We can see things at a very, very great distance, but that goes from top down. We can still smell things from a little bit of a way and hear things from a little bit of a way, but to taste things, we have to put them in our mouth so it becomes closer. And then lastly, touch, that has to occur right at the level of the skin, right? So we progress from this ostensibly dual state where the sensation and the thing that we are sensing are very different, and that moves into them becoming more one thing. So in that sense, we can say that we are heading towards this non-dual state of luminosity. So next time when we resume our discussion, we'll start to talk about the subtle dissolution of the consciousness on the level of the dissolution of the inner dissolution. So, and there are 3 stages of that. For tonight, let's finish up by reciting the sharing of merits and the refuges.